Dave had to be the expert and final say on every little thing, and he had to run everyone over at full blast to let you know about it. He could suck it in around people he didn't know, but he was always stalking people's conversations so he could run everyone over with, "My stuff's the only right stuff, my way's the only right way." Early on, Sandy stopped over to talk about something she was doing, and Dave just sits there all bug-eyed and laughing and running her over with, "I'm the expert, I'm the only right way." Every time she tried to speak, he'd run her over with, "Ma-me, ma-me, ma-me, ma-me." And he did it with his kids. They couldn't talk about anything they were doing, their likes or opinions. Dave would run them down with, "I'm the expert, I'm the only right way." And I watched them grow up and learn not to talk about anything around him, nothing that would give him an in. And they wouldn't approach a subject directly with him. They'd ask his opinion and then let him beat his chest. And then they'd circle around and say, "Well, this is what's actually going on," or "This is what's actually being done. Is it okay if we go do it anyway?" And then he'd beat his chest for a while and before he relented. There was only one time in 13 years, twice counting the movie, where Dave didn't have to tag along when Vicky went out. Now imagine this. Vicky calls and says, "Girls' night out?" I'm like, "Okay." And I show up at this bar and there's a table full of women and Dave. I mean, it was the shortest night out ever. They're all staring at the walls, staring at the table. No one's speaking. There's no sense in trying, because there's no one there that Dave pretends to respect. And Vicky starts to get up out of her chair, and all of us women stand up at the same time and put on our coats, and we all leave. Not a word. And she just didn't get it, and I wasn't going to tell her. But I learned real quick to drive myself and to always ask who was going and what was going on when Vicky called to go out. Because if there weren't enough people around to buffer Dave, it would just be ma-me, 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 ma-me the whole night. One time I was talking to Vicky, and I said 4 words. I hang those t-shirts. And Dave comes up from behind screaming bloody murder in a full-on Beverly rage. "That's wrong! You don't hang t-shirts! That's dumb, that's stupid, ma-me, 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 ma-me." And I just turned and walked away and went back to what I was doing and let Dave beat his chest till he felt like a man. I mean, my ego wasn't so fragile that I felt the need to explain that I was a grown-ass adult who had always paid for my own clothes and my own closets, and I could do anything I wanted. Besides, it was Dave. I mean, he was beyond a monster. Feral toddler. I just don't have the words to describe. That's why he didn't even make it on the Shitty People video. But that's the things you do for friends, right? My bad. And you know, I wasn't being rude. That's how Vicky always dealt with Dave. We'd be hanging out in the kitchen, and he'd be hanging out in the living room, glued to the television, but he'd be stalking our conversations until he found some reason to charge into the room and run us down screaming, "I'm the expert. My stuff's the only right stuff. I'm the only right way. Ma-me, ma-me, ma-me." And Vicky would physically turn away from him. She would not acknowledge him. She wouldn't respond. She'd just get busy looking busy at the kitchen sink and let him beat his chest till he felt like a man and walked away. And there were times he'd notice and he'd flip on a dime. Be like, "Where you going? What's up with this or that?" And if she responded, it would be with vague 3 or 4 word sentences. Not because we had anything to hide, but because she was trying not to give him anything to beat his chest about. You know, I never said anything. I just sat there staring out the window. Not my man, God. Not my problem. Not until October 2006 when they invited me into their home to pad their bank accounts. No, I was so desperate for someone to tell me what the hell was going on that I was willing to put up with Dave. Because I knew, as long as I didn't actually try to have a conversation about anything within earshot of Dave, he'd just sit there glued to the television. But I literally could not finish a sentence around him. Ever. The first week I was there, I asked Vicky where to get gas in North Ridgeville. And she says, ask Dave. I make him take care of it. And he was standing there not 10, 15 feet away. And he heard me ask her. But I could not finish a sentence. He started screaming, Tuesday, Tuesday, I get gas on Tuesday. Gas is cheaper on Tuesday. And Vicky turned all purple and ran out of the room, and he just stood there all bug-eyed and laughing. I mean, just useless. He was always that way. He was too busy running people down so he could beat his chest, answer a simple question. I mean, he was always just a monster. And I mean, Vicky never even met Scott until we were engaged. And I told Scott on the way out there to meet them, said, I've been friends with Vicky for 10 years, but Dave is just a loudmouth creep. You just tolerate Dave in small doses. And he just laughed. And even after we got married and had people over, the last time I tried to talk to Diane, Scott said, why don't you invite Vicky and Dave? I said, I've never invited Vicky to do anything with anybody I know because of Dave. He's just a loudmouth bully who won't let anyone have a conversation. We'll have him over in a couple weeks. And he just laughed. I get it now. Dave's just a church lady on steroids with only one loop and one religious cliche. I'm the only right way. And they say you really don't know someone until you live with them. I would have never guessed, it would have never crossed my mind that Vicky and Dave were religious. But that's when Dave started beating his chest about his conservative talk radio and just laugh. And still feeding on how Sandy was scammed by her boyfriend years later. And still feeding on his sister's failed marriage, all bug-eyed and laughing. That's when I realized how much Dave actually hated women. And it would be so easy to blame this all on Dave. But it was Vicky was planning to scam me before. Vicky was planning to scam me for every penny and everything that she could before I walked in the door. I spent 3 months watching the Jerry Springer show. Everything was lies and manipulation. Watching Vicky throw her fits. And she would not tell me what her problem was. And she didn't want to hear I had no interest in Dave. She'd just turn purple and run away. 3 months of listening to her use her selective memory to whine about how nobody ever did enough, nobody ever spent enough, nobody ever gave enough, and it was never good enough for poor Vicky. And of course, their stuff should have been mine. So not only was their marriage a scam, every relationship Vicky had was a scam. She spent 13 years having me buy her kids birthday presents, Christmas presents, fundraisers, babysitting, and carting her kids around town. Not all the time, but 13 years. Now they were grown. Johnny had graduated, he was off in basic training, and Michael was in high school. She didn't need to string me along for another decade. And she'd watch Scott destroy everything I'd worked my whole life for. Everything I had left that fit in a pod, except the stuff that had to go to her house, like the bicycle and the sewing machine, stuff she hid away hoping I'd forget about. You know, the stuff she fell into a hysterical puddle of tears over when I expected to take it with me when I left. Yeah, this was just her final scam. She was in it for the big money. So there was nothing worth fighting for. And it was way above my pay grade to explain their dysfunctional relationship and what was going on to her son. 13 years I had never badmouthed or contradicted either one of them to their kids, no matter what I thought. And you know what I thought. I guess I just wasn't trained up the white way. Besides, Michael had spent his whole life trying to play the peacekeeper in the family. Even if I had been shitty enough to drag him into it, there's nothing he could have said or done to change her mind. Now, I never belonged to a gang, and I never hung in any circles. And it's never mattered who I told what has happened with Vicky and Dave. There's not been one person who wasn't willing to go on attack. I guess a good church lady would not only settle for a Dave, but would be facing a married Dave who hadn't let her finish a sentence in 13 years. I'm supposed to want to live like that and call it wove. Not a church lady. Never was. Don't want to be. Or is it because I didn't get on the internet and dish their dirt to the whole world? So I don't care what you think. You weren't there. So maybe now I'm doing it the white way. Now, if I wanted to be nasty, if I wanted to get even, I could talk about all the people who laughed and joked that Johnny wasn't even Dave's kid. I mean, it fits in with their origin story. Nothing about how they met or dated or fell in love. And Vicky was tending bar and Dave was a customer, by the way. Nope, it was short, sweet, and scripted when they were together. Vicky got pregnant and Dave said he wouldn't marry her. So Vicky played dumb. She did her stone statue routine and just refused to respond or take any responsibility until Dave decided to marry her. And she was so proud that she made Dave decide to marry her. Because, that sounds like a solid foundation for a healthy relationship. And, Johnny didn't look like anyone on either side of the family. Michael was the spitting image of his mother. So maybe Dave's DNA just wasn't winning any races. Maybe Dave hated women, in part because he felt scammed. Maybe Vicky picked Dave because she couldn't get a word in edgewise, and she knew she could spend a lifetime playing dumb and making Dave take care of everything. Regardless, they were perfect for each other. They deserved each other. And I'm supposed to want to live like that because the church calls it wove. I can hardly imagine how much it must have burnt Dave up that Vicky had a friend who wasn't desperate for a man, who wouldn't go out with any of the randos they tossed at me. Well, look in the mirror. And who was willing and able to set goals and work and sacrifice to achieve them. And I bet he still can't see how it was his own toxic personality that attracted Vicky to him in the first place. I mean, if you want to be a blowhard, know-it-all, narcissistic bully, you're probably going to attract a scrubbing, scamming Vicky who wants to spend a lifetime playing dumb and making you take care of everything. You got exactly what you wanted. But hey, sure, it's all my fault for ever being friends with a woman who was so proud to trap a Dave. And I'm sure it's all my fault. I would have never guessed that Vicky and Dave were religious, or that Dave would end up being the poster child for the Christian church. You still can't convince me that the percentage of church ladies who would be willing to settle for a Dave could be in the double digits. But I just have to be wrong about every stupid little thing that maybe that explains all the happily married, happily coupled church ladies. That's sarcasm. There's your unicorn. I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm saying I never met one. They're all wailing and whining about their abusive, neglectful, miserable man gods, and then just so desperate to prove that they're better than me because they have a man. You won. No competition. Now, Vicky, you can call me fat or gay or a gold digger, whatever you need to feel good about your miserable marriage. I wouldn't change a single day to end up like you. Now, if you could do just one positive thing for womankind in your life, please don't die before Dave. Or how about Tom? Remember the poor abused man with the psycho ex-wife? Now don't get me wrong, she was certifiable. She made Beverly look like a declawed, toothless, sedated little kitten. And I never spoke to her, was never in the same room. But oh, the stories I could tell. The things she was willing to do to her own kids. I remember getting in the car with him to go visit his parents, and he's telling me how they'd been married for 50 years, and then telling me how his father was an abusive tyrant, but that his mother would never leave him. She'd never get a divorce because the Catholic Church would disown her. And he's sitting over there giggling about it. And sure enough, as soon as he thought he had me hooked, he started to play the same shitty little head games with me he was blaming on his ex. Not once, not twice. Just like Scott, a switch flipped overnight. He went from Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde, and it was nothing but narcissistic baby games. But I was already gone. He thought that I was trained up proper to believe I'm just a slab of meat without an owner who should have to put up with anything for anybody. Not a church lady. Never was. Don't want to be. So I knew that much about the Catholic Church. Just that much, and I never bothered the Catholic Church, did I? I could never believe in a mono God, a creator of the universe and everything in it, who would expect a woman to spend a lifetime in an abusive, dysfunctional marriage and raise her kids in an abusive, dysfunctional household so they could go out and repeat the same abusive, dysfunctional family patterns for eternity in order to have the right social status or to look the white way on Sunday morning. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. I didn't know that would be the only Christian church I ever found. See, I'd already spent 3 years married into a good Christian family. I've seen all the good Christian love I needed to last me several lifetimes. But it's all my fault. It's all my fault. I didn't know what I was seeing. And forget 13 years. I spent 3 months up close and personal watching the Jerry Springer show. I mean, watching a good Christian marriage live and in action. But it's all my fault. I would have never guessed that Vicky and Dave were religious, or that Dave would end up being the poster child for the Christian church. And it's been nonstop since 2005. You've never wavered, never failed to show me what it really means to you to be a Christian. You won. No competition. I understand OppositeLand. Oh, here's one. I was working at JCI, and this woman from work wants to fix me up with her brother. So I met up with them to go out to this bar, and they're smoking drugs on the way into the bar. It wasn't pot. And we weren't there 2 minutes, and her brother breaks a glass and lunges over the bar, and is at 2 guys sitting there. I mean, they hadn't said a word to us. I mean, what the hell? Within 5 minutes, I was already gone. So I get to work on Monday, and she asks, "Do you want to go out with my brother again?" Like, no. She says, "Well, he just needs a good woman to straighten him out." Like, really? I'm not looking for a project, especially not a puzzle with half the pieces missing. And then she says, "Well, you're the only woman I know who looks good enough for him." Strike 4, 5, 6. I mean, who could keep count? See, I get it now. She thought I was a church lady. 'Cause a good church lady would be jumping through hoops for any creep who tossed her a scrap and thought she looked good enough. And I mean, he didn't say 2 words to me the whole night. He couldn't form a complete sentence. Was I supposed to think that he looked good enough to be his personal punching bag when he wasn't out starting fights with strangers in bars? Not a church lady. Never was. Don't want to be. I'm not trying to convince you of anything more than that I understand OppositeLand. Or how about Ken? Just another poster child for the Christian church. I'm working at JCI, and I apply for this QC clerk's position. Now, Ken was promoted and was supposed to be training me to do his old job. And all he kept saying was, "I liked her. She was nice to me. She wore dresses. She was a Christian. I liked her. She was nice to me. She wore dresses. She was a Christian." Just stuck in the same loop. Faster, louder, faster, louder. Well, I was nice to him. And to put it nicely as possible, he was a bitter, angry little creep with a chip on his shoulder the size of Texas. Every other thing was, "I'm entitled. I'm entitled." Oh, and bitching about women taking men's jobs. Yeah, he was that guy. He heard I was taking college classes, and he charges up to me and says, I got a bachelor's degree. I went to Ohio State. I went to a real school. Spun on his heels and ran away. Then he came in the office one morning screaming bloody murder that he heard I was dating Tom. Well, and then he just spun on his heels and ran away. Well, it wasn't a secret. And if I hadn't been dating anybody, I would have lied. I would have made somebody up. Because I was scared. But in what I would learn is typical church fashion, he was way too busy talking about me behind my back and trying to bully me into being some woman's doppelganger to ever consider speaking to me. So he was supposed to be training me on this QC software. And he's standing over me and he tells me to tab 4 or 5 times and then tells me to copy a field and then he screams in my face, "What did you do? I didn't see." I'm like, "I copied it." And he spins on his heels and runs out of the office. That was his signature move. And that was it. He never did train me on that software because I didn't copy. Duh, white way. So then he's supposed to be training me to maintain the SBC charts. I'd never looked at one, hadn't taken a statistics class yet. See, I'm admitting my sins. And he hands me a stack of charts and says, plot the graphs, and leaves the office. So then he comes back after lunch and I said, the curves are off. And he says, move the center line, spins on his heels and leaves the office. Yeah, you know where this is going. 2 or 3 days later, all the QC techs come piling in the office because the specs are off. And Ken's on the other side of the office with his back to me, arms flailing, just bitching me out to management. And then he spins on his heels and runs away. I mean, my jaw was just on the floor. See, no amount of nice was getting me trained to do my job. I wasn't about to start wearing dresses to work in a manufacturing plant and trying to fulfill his emotional needs. And I never did get trained to do any aspect of the job I was hired to do. Ken moved out of the office and took his old position with him, and I became the QS 9000 data entry clerk. They cut my pay, they cut my hours. Other managers I'd never worked for or spoke to were getting snarky with me, and then they started screwing with my work. I'd print out the management meeting notes, and there'd be the same words spelled wrong throughout the whole document. And it's fine on the screen. It's fine in the dictionary, so screw it. I'd print it out and ship it. Same way with printing out the QS 9000 documents. Same 3 or 4 letter words would be misspelled throughout the whole document. And it's fine on the screen, fine in the dictionary. Well, fuck it. I had them signed and stuck them in a binder. I mean, you can't pay me enough to play stupid baby games with your narcissistic bully boys who are purposely screwing with my job. And you will never convince me to let you auction me off to one. Because the church calls this love. Don't you think I wish I'd been trained up in OppositeLand decades earlier? I would have never worn that necklace. Never considered marriage. I'd have lied. I'd have said I was gay. I mean, that would have saved me from decades of bullshit and harassment. Decades, plural, before I got churched in 2005. So half the QC department goes up to corporate for a training class, and we all get the same memo. It's business casual. And Ken shows up in the same ratty holy Wranglers, ratty holy tennis shoes, ratty holy t-shirts that he wears into the plant every day, taped glasses, hair sticking out at odd angles everywhere, and they're all teasing him about it. Not me, not a word, straight-faced. I was already taking my whoopings at work every day. And you know what he says? I shouldn't have to get dressed up. People should just accept me the way I am. Yeah, I get it now. See, it's crystal clear. See, I thought I was a complete and whole human being and that I was hired to get along and do a job. And I still do. See, I'm admitting my sins. And I guess being seen as subhuman, I should just be thankful Ken wasn't pressuring me for sex or trying to bully me into dating him. You know, through all the petty drama and catfighting between shifts and positions and departments, and I'm not dissing, I just wasn't interested for hating for the sake of hating. I just wanted to get along and do my job. I guess I just wasn't trained up to hate the white way. And now I never felt the need to be everyone's BFF or anyone's BFF. If we got along or hung out, great. If you didn't like me, Ken, Carrie, I obviously can't help that. I probably didn't like you either. The difference is, when I walked out the door, I didn't think of you again until I saw you again. Love me or hate me, I'm in your head and I'm in your hearts. And whether you gave me what I needed to do my job, or you just needed someone to screw with to feel like a man and prove you got the power, you were getting what you wanted. See, I didn't have a mommy to support me if I disappeared from work for a week, Kelly. And I didn't have a mommy to keep me from being fired for drinking on the job and hitting somebody's car, Tracy. And I didn't have a man god or a mommy to support me if I became unemployable because I was being accused of drinking on the job or stealing from my employer, Tracy. And I didn't have a mommy who hated the world but would always turn a blind eye to my bad behavior and clean up my messes, Scott. And I didn't have parents to marry me off when I got pregnant and give us a house so I could spend decades screaming bloody murder, how no one and nothing was ever good enough for me, Beverly. And I didn't have a big family, 5 siblings and a bunch of in-laws that I could sit around whining, never did enough for me, Vicky. I never had any of those support systems or social safety nets or that grand sense of entitlement. I just wanted to get along and do my fucking job. Well, you fixed that, didn't you? 'Cause that'll convince me to let you auction me off. You want another good laugh? At my expense, of course. See, I thought when I got out of those customer service positions, and then manufacturing, and then the unskilled office positions, I thought when I finally got into a professional work environment, the backstabbing, catfighting, and grand sense of entitlement would subside. Not go away, 'cause people are people, but subside. And every tiny step I took was really 3 steps back. See, I'm admitting my sins. Guess I'm just not that smart. And I'm sure that somehow it's all my fault. So how about Dottie? I knew Dottie for over 15 years. I don't even remember how we met. She was a lot older, and we didn't hang out often. I didn't call her often. I usually let her call me because she had these manic episodes, or she would go on attack for no apparent reason. And I was 19 years old, been living on my own for 2 years, working 2 jobs, and I had finally saved up for a car. And I'm talking to Dottie one day, and I was just thrilled to finally have a car. So I didn't have to walk across town 4 times a day to 2 different jobs. And she just screeches in the phone, "Well, aren't you special?" What the hell? Yep, and it's been 17 years of the religious special. And she had it all by most people's standards. She had a 3 or 4-bedroom colonial in a nice suburb, new car every 2 years. She made 3 or 4 times what I made. Totally subscribed to the shopping is therapy theory. Every time I went over there, she was showing off her remodeling and redecorating projects. She could spend an hour or more just showing me through all the boxes she had packed in closets and stuffed under beds. Just random stuff. And she had a man. She dated the same guy the whole time I knew her. And she had a kid, my age. But she couldn't be happy for me when I'd worked my ass off for a little something of my own. I get it now. Right before Y2K, I picked up the phone and said, hello? One word, and it was Dottie. I got a fireplace, and I got a bunch of cast iron cookware, and I got a room full of food, and nobody's staying with me. And I got a bunch of this, and I got a bunch of that. And people keep asking, can I stay with you? And nobody's staying with me. And then she hung up. The only reason she called was to brag on her big old pile of shit. So she calls one time to hang out, and I drive over there one evening in the dark, in the snow, in my 20-year-old beater with no heat. My third beater at that point, by the way. And she hands me her Christmas list and tells me to check off what I'm going to get her. And then she starts talking about her remodeling projects. Well, okay. So I go over a few weeks later and walk through the door to snarly, screeching Dottie. I give her her gifts and open my dollar store candle, and I'm trying to talk to her, but everything out of her mouth, she's just screaming in anger. And she's not saying anything. She won't tell me what her problem is, so I just left. I mean, if you're mad about something, let it out. I'll listen. If you're mad at me, tell me. I don't read minds. But if you're just going to screech in my face like a baby Beverly, I'm gone. And she just stood there in the doorway glaring at me as I pulled out of the driveway and left. See, I get it now. I never spent enough. I never did enough. And it was never good enough for all the entitled church ladies. Right, Dottie? Vicky? Diane? And we didn't have any common friends. And we didn't hang in any circles. She only talked about 2 women on occasion, and I didn't know either one of them. And I hadn't seen her boyfriend for years, since I was probably 22. I just thought she had manic episodes. And I rarely called her because I just never knew which Dottie I would get. So we were talking one time and she blurts out, my boyfriend said at least Laura was smart enough to never go out with me. Well, duh. And other times we'd be hanging out and she'd just blurt out all the doctors she had slept with or start bragging on her conquest just out of nowhere. Like, well, okay. And I remembered talking to Dottie, all upset, when Bo fired me for not putting out, when Klein went on attack, when Jim, after more than a decade of being friends with Diane, got me cornered and was pawing all over me. And Dottie said, don't tell 'em. Don't say anything. They know their man god's a whore. They'll only hate you for it. Dottie's the one who told me Jim was the biggest whore in town. Well, I didn't know. Now, I'm sure you're going to tell me I should have been out trying to trap me a man god. But when I wasn't at work or in school, I was usually trying to sleep through fibro flares. I had absolutely no interest in playing shitty little head games with your narcissistic bully boys. And it never took long. 2 months, 2 dates, was oftentimes before they ever asked me out. Like they were testing me to see how much bullshit I'd put up with in order to have a man. But I was already gone. And of course then they'd get nasty and go on attack because I wasn't jumping through hoops and squealing, "Ooh, it's a man god, pick me, pick me." See, they thought I was trained up proper to believe I'm just a slab of meat without an owner who should have to put up with anything for anybody. Well, I didn't get the memo until 2005. And if that wasn't going to happen before, Scott, it certainly wasn't going to happen after. Okay? Not a church lady. Never was. Don't want to be. I'm not trying to convince you of anything more than that I understand opposite land. And it's been 17 years of the shitty little bully boy, shitty little comments about my body, trying to guilt and shame me for not fulfilling my only purpose in the world as an enslaved incubator. Well, look in the mirror. So Dottie calls one time, and she wants to drive to Pittsburgh to visit her son. But she doesn't want to make the trip alone. She's afraid to be on the road for 3 hours by herself. Now I was working over 60 hours a week and dealing with chronic pain and fatigue. The last thing I wanted to do was spend the weekend cramped up in her little car visiting people I didn't know. But she had helped me move once or twice, and sometimes you do things you really don't want to do to help a friend, right? My bad. So we get on the road, and she's telling me about her son and telling me about his school and his sports and his job. And she's telling me about his girlfriend and how he's spending this outrageous amount of money designing her an engagement ring. That's normal, right? We're going to visit these people. Then she goes into her label loop. I was raised in Baptist church. I go to Baptist church. I was raised Baptist church. I go to Baptist church. I go to Baptist church. Over 15 years, she had never asked me about my religious background. And to be fair, she never wanted to know anything about me personally. She was way too busy talking about herself. And I had decades of experience. I knew when someone went into the label loop, the claws were coming out. And I knew Dottie well enough. I was not about to incite a riot on a road trip. So I just did the nod and smile, nod and smile. And then she starts talking about me and her son. Me and her son this, me and her son that. Like she was trying to fix us up. She never came right out and said it. And she never said that she didn't like his girlfriend or that she had any reservations about them marrying. I thought I had to be reading this wrong. So we get to the hotel that evening, and her son shows up, and he's not there 2 minutes when Dottie lunges across the room for her purse and runs out the door. Not a word. Just leaves me there with her son for like 20 or 30 minutes. I was furious. Just furious. I could not wrap my head around it. And then she got manic. Me and her son this, me and her son that, faster, louder, faster, louder. And we spent the whole day with her son and his girlfriend. And when we weren't with them, she was just stuck in the same loop. Faster, louder, faster, louder. 3-hour ride home. She never paused, never switched gears. She just kept spinning in the same loops. And I was scared. She was driving. I thought she was having one of her manic episodes. It's been 17 years of the wackadoodle church ladies, spinning through the same loops, faster and louder, faster and louder. Handful of one-breath scripted little stories that they just keep looping through. Faster, louder, faster, louder. Usually, more often than not, wailing and whining about their abusive, neglectful, miserable man gods. Faster, louder, faster, louder. And of course, in the next breath, they're just desperate to prove that they're better than me because they have a man god. Well, you won. No competition. See, I get it now. Dottie thought I was a church lady because a good church lady would be so desperate for a man that she would have got busy trying to trap some guy who lived 3 hours away and who was in love with and ready to marry another woman. Because, that sounds like a solid foundation for a healthy relationship. Not a church lady. Never was. Don't want to be. I'm not trying to convince you of anything more than that I understand OppositeLand. And I invited Dottie to my wedding. And I saw her at the reception and went over to say hello. And she saw me coming and snapped some snarky comment as she ran away. Yeah, she couldn't even show up for me and be happy for me when I thought I'd met someone compatible that I would ever consider marrying. Well, it was all a scam, Dottie. So you won. No competition. How about Diane? I was friends with Diane for probably 15 years. I asked her to be my maid of honor. Yay! And Diane and Vicky and I went out shopping for dresses, and they picked their dresses. They picked the color. No bridezilla here. 2 weeks later, Diane and Jim come over for haircuts. And when I was done, Diane says, I'm busy till the end of July. I've got this and I've got that. So I don't have any time for you. Don't even call me till August. I mean, I was in tears, sobbing. What the hell? And I said, just tell me you're actually going to show up for the wedding. She would not look at me, would not respond. They just stood up and left. I was floored. And I called her twice over the course of 6 months, and she never called me back. So I just planned the wedding as if she might not be there. So the end of July, Diane calls and asks for names for the bachelorette party. And I said, I don't want a party. I just want to get together with friends that I thought I made over the years, that I don't have time or energy to keep in touch with regularly. And I wouldn't ask to go to an out-of-state wedding. I just want to catch up with old friends and celebrate a milestone. Silence. She just won't respond. I'm like, what's going on? Dead air. Not a word. So I gave her the names and she hung up. I mean, I didn't even invite Vicky. I mean, she didn't know anyone there. And I knew Dave would have to tag along. And I knew no matter what I said, Vicky would try to turn it into some stripper, adult toy, wild night out, because Vicky was that friend. She used to get so mad when I wasn't interested in picking up men in bars, or her tips on how to pick up men in bars. Didn't matter what I said or how many times I said it, and she couldn't see how her own marriage was a cautionary tale. And she was so insecure about every little thing with everybody, man, woman, and child, that I wasn't telling her. You tell her. So I show up at the sports bar at 4 in the afternoon, and we sit down, and Plura and Dolly are going on and on about people stealing from the laundromat. Just on, and you know what I'm thinking, Kelly. Well, there was nothing to steal from the laundromat. Didn't even hand out change. So if you think I was stealing from you after all of those years, fuck you too. And we weren't there 30 minutes before Diane got up, paid the bill, and everyone just walked out. And I'm following Diane to her car. What is going on? Why won't you talk to me? And she won't respond, won't even look at me. She just goes straight to her car and leaves. I was just floored. At that point, I was hoping she wouldn't even show up. But she does. Maybe 45 minutes before the wedding, and she's bitching about the dress and bitching about the dress. And I'm just ignoring her. I'm trying to get ready. If she picked the dress 7 months earlier, I think she had plenty of time to try it on and have it altered if it didn't fit. Then she's going on and on how I had to have her father walk me down the aisle. Had to have her father walk me down the aisle. Yeah, she just brought her parents along unannounced. And I really didn't want some stranger walking me down the aisle. But I I relented just to shut her up, and he didn't. He dragged me down the aisle. He was a good foot shorter than me, and he was pulling me so fast I was tripping over my dress. I mean, I was just absolutely besides myself. But I tried to blow it off. It was supposed to be my day. So we're out getting pictures before the reception, and Diane's still bitching about the dress every time we stop, and complaining that she didn't get to ride in the limousine. Yeah. And I wouldn't look at her. I just wouldn't respond. I had even asked Vicky to do the toast since, well, Diane. And what did she do? She just made some crude joke. Yeah, I pick really shitty friends, don't I? So the reception formalities are over, and I'm with some of the bridal party talking to Scott's family's guests, and they're gushing about the wedding, and we're talking about talking about all that went into putting it together, and Diane charges right into the center of this group of people and screams, "Why didn't you include me in any of that?" And I said, "You told me not to bother you till August and quit speaking to me." And as I was responding, she spun on her heels and ran away. And then she did it again. We were talking to some of Scott's family's guests, and they were gushing over Michael. Vicky's son, Michael, was our ring bearer, and we always had a special connection. We had been best buds since he was a baby. And Vicky's talking about all the things I had done with her kids over the years. You know, all this stuff she'd be bitching about a few years later that was never enough for her. And Diane charges into the middle of this group of people and screams, "Why didn't you do any of that for my kids?" And I screamed back, "You told me not to." And that fast she had already spun on her heels and ran away. I was just flabbergasted. Twice. There was 2 times when her kids were young that Diane was all upset that her kids were going to be home alone for an hour after school. And I said, "It's on my way to work. I don't have class that day. If it's only for an hour, I can be there." And she was adamant. Nobody has anything to do with our kids but family. No babysitters, nothing. That's just the way our family is. And while I was working 2 jobs and taking college classes, I wasn't looking to be a babysitter. I was just offering to help a friend. And, you know, I could respect that. I didn't take offense. And I always took an interest in her kids, their school, their friends, her son's sports, her daughter's art. They were good kids. But I took a totally hands-off approach because that's what she wanted. Now, after 6 months of refusing to speak to me, she shows up at my wedding and spends the whole day bitching and complaining. All about Diane. And, you know, she was 4 or 5 years older than me, and they had it all by most people's standards. They had been married for almost 2 decades. They'd owned their house for almost 2 decades. I mean, Diane repainted the whole house every year. They remodeled. She had a nice car. I remember watching her blow $50, $100 or more on lottery tickets regularly. I remember watching her spend more on scratch-offs in an evening than I took home from 2 jobs every week. And everyone she knew was married at least once. Even her daughter was married, owned their home, had a baby, and she couldn't show up for me and be happy for me when I thought I'd met someone compatible that I would ever consider marrying. Compatibility. Now there's a whole boatload of crazy liberal feminist ideas that don't have any place in the anything for anybody Christian church. Well, it was all a scam, Diane. So you won. No competition. And I'm sure that somehow it's all my fault. Now, how about Jim? Back in February, the last time I had cut their hair, I had asked Jim if he'd videotape the ceremony, since Diane was in the wedding, and, you know, I didn't know she was bringing her parents. And they set him up right up front, off to the side. And I watched that video when we got home, and it was a total waste. You couldn't see anything. You couldn't hear anything. We were just ants in this video. And I don't know who he was talking to, but Jim just beat his chest over the whole ceremony. "I'm the man, I got this, and I do that," and kicked the tripod, the video would shake, and all you would hear is Jim, "Me, me, 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 me." Do you think Jim would have spewed a Dave over the whole ceremony if I hadn't said no twice? Or how about Nicole's wedding? Diane didn't sit Beverly and me in the same table or even at the same area. She sat us with a bunch of strangers, which was fine with me. Everyone was laughing and having a good time. And I remember looking around and looking behind me, and there's Beverly and her man, God, at an empty table across the room. And the whole area had cleared out. Beverly standing over this table, red-faced and furious, just ready to blow. She's slamming things around and beating on the poor centerpiece. I mean, just busy, trying to look busy. And her man, God, was sitting there looking like a trapped animal. And I made it a point not to look in their direction again the rest of the night. Not a word. Now that may be all the Christian church teaches women friendship is proximity, but I'm not a church lady. And after the wedding, I called Diane a couple months later, because you know I'm not that smart. Scott wanted to have some people over, and I thought I could get Diane to talk to me, figure out what was going on. Diane, Jim, show up. She would not speak to me, would not respond. She wouldn't even look at me when I spoke to her. She sat there like a pissy little bitch for 45 minutes, and then they just stood up and left. Not a word. No, I had wasted 15 years being friends with someone who would do me like that. And Diane always spoke her mind. I always trusted her to tell me what she thought. And then this? Now, I don't read minds. I can't fight something. I can't fix something when I'm talking to a fucking rock. So I just let her go. And I never heard from her again. I pick really shitty friends, don't I? But I'm sure somehow, it's all my fault. See, that's what brought Beverly to mind after almost 20 years. After the priorities video, all my rando monkeys started screeching, "It's all her fault. It's not her fault. It's not your fault." 20 years it took me to think of Beverly. And since doing the shitty people video, all the snarly, screeching church ladies have subsided, and it's bug-eyed, hysterical laughter. Now, don't get me wrong, Beverly was an equal opportunity rager. She didn't even need a topic, but she was always going on about how her man God was a piece of shit, he didn't do anything right, and everything under the sun was specifically and personally his fault. Now, Diane introduced me to Beverly as her hairdresser, as Beverly was leaving her house one time. 30-second interaction. The only other time I saw Beverly at Diane's was when she charged into the kitchen and screamed, "That's dirty!" and ran away and hid. We never hung out together. Never talked about Beverly. I tried being friendly with her. I told you about that first year. And I tried to bring up Beverly's special psychosis to Diane more than once. And Diane would just fall into a puddle of hysterical laughter and say, "That's just Bev. Bev's been that way since school." And she'd tell the one story about how one of Bev's girls peed on her couch, and Beverly didn't try to clean it up. She didn't say a word. She just left. Not a word. If I heard that story once, I heard it half a dozen times over the course of a decade, because that's how often Beverly came up. It was their man gods who were friends, and their man gods' friends who would come around telling horror stories about Beverly's latest meltdowns. Beverly says it's her man god's fault that she don't have any friends, and nobody will come to the house, and they'd all fall into a puddle of hysterical laughter. And Diane would say, "That's just Bev. She's been that way since school," and tell the same story. So now, if I need to apologize for not inviting Vicky's friends and family to my wedding, people I saw maybe once a year with Vicky, I apologize. But Vicky wasn't saying anything, and I didn't think you'd want to spend the time and money on an out-of-state wedding for someone you barely knew. And I really didn't know these people, because even Dave's own family knew you couldn't have a conversation with anyone about anything around Dave. It was always all about Dave. Now, if I was supposed to invite Michelle's whole family, I sincerely apologize. But I didn't have the time or energy to keep in touch with Michelle the way I wanted to. And I really didn't think you'd want to spend the time and money on an out-of-state wedding for someone you hadn't seen in ages. Now, if I was supposed to invite Diane's whole family, I met her parents, her aunt, her sister, maybe 2 or 3 times each over the course of 15 years. If I was supposed to invite all the people that I thought I'd made friends with over the years, people I didn't have the time and energy to keep in touch with regularly. If I was supposed to invite everyone whose hair I'd ever cut, well, go take it up with Diane. I will not apologize for not subjecting over 100 people that I didn't know, who didn't know Beverly, to her special psychosis at my wedding. Now, Dave, I understand. Now, I never knew and I never would have guessed that Vicky and Dave were religious, or that Dave would end up being the poster child for the Christian church. All my fault. All my fault for ever being friends with a woman who was married to a Dave. But if this has anything to do with Beverly, then OppositeLand is an even bigger fucking lie than I could have ever imagined. You know, it was Scott and Carrie that drove me through the doors of a Christian church, looking for some answers to the evil in this world. This was all before Vicky and Dave. You know, not death, not accidents, not natural disasters, evil. And boy, I face planted right into the answer, didn't I? Hit and run, total strangers, just determined to pick me apart over any and every stupid little thing, and desperate to bully me into being auctioned off. And the moment I walked through the doors on Church on the Rise, it was everywhere I went. And I tried a lot longer than most people would. If you hadn't followed me out into the world, I would have left a lot sooner. Methodist, Lutheran, Baptist, Christian, Friends, CMA, Christ Church, and a handful with no specific label in the name or on their sign. And if I wasn't being attacked the first or the second or the third time I walked in the door, I'd call the office, trying to speak to someone. No questions asked, not even my name. They'd shove me off to some group where I was being attacked, walking in the door. You know, I really did. I really thought sooner or later I'd find one person, just one person who would give me 5 minutes of their time, answer my stupid questions, and clue me into what was going on. Not one. I've never found one. You know, for years, I would have said anything, admitted to anything, paid any amount. I would have done anything if I could just find one person who would tell me what the hell was going on. Anything but let you auction me off. And there's never been one, anywhere, ever. It's been 17 years of non-stop religious, narcissistic baby games. I swear you were trying to turn me into one of those wackadoodle church ladies who runs around stuck in the same loops, faster, louder, while you turn your heads and close your eyes and do your shaky shoulders and your fakey laughs. Well, I had 3 loops in the church. 1, I'm new to the church. Is there someone I can talk to? Who are they? Why are they attacking me? And I'm not looking for a man, God. But if you weren't already gone, hit and run, or angrily running me down, even if I kept talking, no one was listening. They'd all just turn their heads and close their eyes and do their shaky shoulders and their fakey laughs. I mean, how many churches, how many groups, how many years am I supposed to say, I'm new to the church? Is there someone I can talk to? When it just isn't true anymore. I mean, if I had ever been desperate for a man, God, if I had ever had any burning desire to be married or have kids, if I had ever gone to one of your singles groups, none of this would have been any fun, would it? And you know, I would have gone to the singles group at Church on the Rise. They didn't have anything else but men's groups and couples groups. And you know I'm not that smart. I would have gone more than once or twice before I figured out it was just some last-ditch arranged marriages. I mean, if you hadn't gone on attack the moment I walk through your doors. And I know it sounds crazy, but what about the last 20 years doesn't? Looking back, I'd bet that they finally put that woman's group together just so they could go on attack and bully me out the door to go be auctioned off. Non-stop for 17 years. 20 if you don't count Scott, Phyllis, and Carrie, because I do. Non-stop, everywhere I go, since the day I was stupid enough to walk through your doors. Just determined to pick me apart over any and every stupid little thing, and desperate to bully me into being auctioned off. 17 years of religious, narcissistic baby games, and then lying to my face about lying to my face about it. You've never wavered, never failed to show me what it really means to you to be a Christian. And I have no delusions that you won't follow me to my dying day to prove your sadistic, narcissistic bully idea of God. I was not here in my new home 24 hours before Cheryl had to let me know she was creeping over here from the moment I moved in. And I have old ladies stopping me in parking lots, stopping me in stores to repeat what I'm saying and doing in my own home, all bug-eyed and hysterical laughter. So I make it a point to talk to my monkeys every day. And I don't know why you get so angry. I'm not saying anything you haven't been shoving down my throat since 2005. I'm supposed to believe that I'm nothing but a slab of meat without an owner, with absolutely no basic human rights beyond enslaved incubator. And I should have to put up with anything for anybody. Sorry, God didn't make me codependent enough to buy into your sadistic, narcissistic, anything for anybody spiritual path. Besides, God didn't give me the white childhood, and God didn't give me the right little mud avatar for your anything for anybody spiritual path. Your rules, not my opinion, your rules. Only the Christian church could make hell itself look like a major step up. And you know what? I am so dumb. I don't know why it's supposed to hurt my feelings that I don't get to be wrong. Because I am so fucking stupid. I still don't know what any of this has to do with Jesus. But majority wins. You won. No competition. I'm not trying to convince you of anything more than that I understand OppositeLand.